the subject of our discussion today is the Nataraja bronze in general and specifically the Nataraja image in Chidambaram. People have been discussing the Nataraja bronze of Chidambaram for about 50 years now. Douglas
Actually,
Barrett,
already 100 years, since Kumaraswamy published.
Well, okay, but we are talking about more the mythological or the iconography aspect. What happened was in 1981, Douglas Barrett, in his paper, dated the Nataraja bronze of Chidambaram to the 13th century. And what I have seen is that Barrett, in his earlier paper, in his Mortimer Wheeler lecture, and also in the 1981 paper, left open the possibility rather, that a Nataraja image, which dated to the early part of the 10th century, or even much earlier than that, existed. And he specifically emphasizes the Nataraja bronze. I will just call it 1969 Nataraja bronze from the British Museum. And he emphasizes that bronze. Now, as we all know, later on, Sharada Srinivasan has dated that particular 1969 bronze to 800 CE. So, essentially establishing the hypothesis or cementing the hypothesis that the Nataraja bronzes existed during the Pallava period itself.
Absolutely. You know how I think about it.
As I went through this background, I became curious as to what the Nataraja would have looked like in the time of the Tevaram hymners. Appar and Sambandar.
Brilliant question.
When they
Very important question.
But even more oddly, I started wondering what the form of Nataraja in Chidambaram looks like today. And this is a very strange question to ask, because I have visited Chidambaram many times and I have even seen the Nataraja during the Mahabhishekam. But I think that when you start paying attention very closely, you realize, you may not have observed as closely as you would have wished to. So I started asking my colleagues.
We see a lot because we expect things, what we see.
I started asking my colleagues.
What we see has to do with our expectations.
And in that, I remembered Liesbeth, Liesbeth Bennink, and I said, let me ask her, because she has spent so much time in Chidambaram, visited there so often, and she has seen so many Mahabhishekam. So she must know what the form of the Nataraja is in Chidambaram. And so we decided to put this discussion together, where we would discuss what the Nataraja looks like today, and what it would have looked like during the time of the Tevaram hymners in the 6th, 7th century. As you all know, other than her attachment to Chidambaram, Liesbeth is a very well-known Indologist and has written quite a bit on Chidambaram, on Nataraja, and various other aspects of Indology. Thank you, Liesbeth, for joining this discussion.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I mean, actually, for me to know the Nataraja, both as a Bhakta and as a scholar, it's always, an evolution. And I've grown into it little by little. And of course, especially through my connection with my Dikshitar. And without him, I wouldn't know these things that we will be talking about today. And then of course, I worked on it after he passed away. I worked on it independently. And it's a very interesting question. Also, actually from the point of view of doctrine, and not just art history, but also doctrine and spirituality.
So, Liesbeth, maybe you can tell us a little bit. I mean, okay, can tell us a little bit about. Oops, I don't know how I'm. How
I was supposed to introduce you too, eh? Because
okay, go ahead.
our connection is because of your brilliant research into the Patanjali Rishi and his connection to South India and Chidambaram in particular. And I'm eagerly awaiting the publication of your PhD. So, because I understood from what you told me that you brought out a lot of new understanding of this semi-mythological figure and or historical, actually very important, spiritually important historical figure. Yeah, so actually what happens a lot is that most people actually know the Nataraja as this dynamic dancer with the hair whirling, the circle of flames. And this particular Murti is since the 30s of the previous century in Amsterdam, in the Rijksmuseum. And to me, it's maybe the most beautiful Nataraja that I'm aware of. And maybe the pinnacle of the classical Chola period, as far as Natarajas is concerned, and the dynamics of the movement with the raised leg and the dancing foot placed on the mualaga, on the dwarf, and then the hair wildly, spread around his head, because the dynamics of his movement that we can imagine is a wild twirling. I mean, it's called Ananda Tandava, the wild dance of bliss. And this is how most people know Nataraja. This is probably the most exported bronze image from India, also for the tourists, of course. And there are a whole bunch of very specific elements that express the doctrine and the mythology behind it, which is things like the Ganga, the river Ganga in Shiva's hair, and the skull, and the crane feathers, crescent moon in his hair, and the datura flower, and that he wears one male and one female earring, expressing that he balances both energies in his essence, in his being. And this is how most people know and love the dancing Shiva.
Okay, so this is, as Liesbeth said, the well-recognized form of Nataraja. But the Nataraja that you see at Chidambaram is quite, or Tillai as it's called in Tamil, the Nataraja that you see at Chidambaram is quite different than the one that Liesbeth photographed at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. It's very different. What you actually see is that the Nataraja form is not what everyone is used to. And to define or to describe the Murti or the image at Chidambaram, Dr. Sri Sivaram Murthy, in his magnum opus on Nataraja, coined the term the Chidambaram type to refer to the image at Chidambaram. So in this presentation, Liesbeth has actually given me, and we are now sharing it with everyone, photographs from various museums which have been culled together and will be shown, which actually describes the form of Chidambaram. Another thing that I wish to bring to your attention is that Dr. Shivaramurthy's book is now online, which is really great. And you can actually
wow.
see some of the images. One of the images which is mentioned here, but the photograph is not available, is the Keelkatur. It's actually the Keelkatur, not Keelkatur bronze that can be found in Shivaramurthy's book, but the photograph is not displayed in this presentation. So, Liesbeth, let me just bring up this image you have photographed, and maybe you can describe the attributes of this image, which I think is similar to what is seen in Tillai today.
Yeah, well, this realization of the differentness of the Chidambaram Nataraja from standard Natarajas, yeah, as far as that can be said. I don't think there are standard Natarajas. I think every temple had its doctrine and its mythology, and according to that, there would be slight and subtle differences between the murtis of the different temples. And I wouldn't even know where to begin to try and understand all that. But Raja told me about the differences little by little, yeah, over countless casual conversations. And so some of the differences are, for instance, the Prabha of flames in Chidambaram has specifically 21 flames, which has a significance, a doctrinal significance, and also he wears a kind of slightly different hairdo, because he specifically wears the crane feather, and he wears the datura flower, and also the kudumi. And the kudumi, that is the hair tuft of how the Dikshitars wear their hair when they perform rituals. So it's on the left side, which to them expresses the Advaitic nature of the doctrine of their temple, the Vedic nature of the doctrine of the temple, and the attributes are the same. The Dhammavu in the right hand and the flame in the left, and then the fear not hand, and the hand that shows the foot, and where the release of the soul is accomplished through the lifted foot and the dance. But these murtis have also these two musicians, and they are two ganas, they are actually asuras, and one is called Banu Gopa or Banu Kampa, and the other is called Banasura, and one plays the drum or the 5 faces drum, the pot drum, and the other plays the talam. And this is very specific for the Chidambaram Nataraja. And this murti from the Pondicherry Museum, Raja told me, introduced me, oh, Liesbeth, this is how our Nataraja is. This murti must have belonged once upon a time as the personal worship murti for a Dikshitar family. And so this murti completely represents the Chidambaram Nataraja. And specifically, we look at things like the crane feather, the kudumi, the tuft, the datura flower, and no skull in the hair. Raja was emphatic about it. No skull in the hair.
Should I move on to this, or should you want me to show the next one?
No, this one is fine. Now this murti is also from Amsterdam, but it's tiny. It's only about this high. And this again represents the Chidambaram Tillai Nataraja with the oval Prabha, and the attributes are the normal, the drum and the flame and the fear not hand and the hand that points to the raised foot. And again, here we see the musicians with one playing the pot drum and the other playing the talam, the cymbals, that is for the rhythm of the dance. It is a tandava. And what I understood about the doctrine behind this is, oh yeah, and the hair is down. I completely forgot. In this murti, the hair is always falling down on the shoulders because it is the end of the dance. And it is a Shanti murti. It is a Shanti, a peace-bringing murti, because he is giving peace to the universe through his raised foot and through the dance in Chidambaram. And that is essential for the doctrine of the Nataraja in Chidambaram.
Liesbeth, you mentioned to me earlier about the anklets on the feet and the kinkini on the leg. So
yeah, we see in some murtis we see the kinkini is there, like the one in Amsterdam. But for instance, can you go to the previous slide? Here, this murti does not wear the kinkini, as far as I can see. So, yeah, even in the smaller murtis, there are sometimes subtle differences.
Now, this is very close. This one,
yeah.
and the keel cartoon is similar to this.
Yeah.
So this is the Mela Perumballam image from Madras Museum, which Liesbeth has photographed. So this would be very similar to the form in Chidambaram, but for the skull, isn't it, Liesbeth? Is that?
Yeah. I mean, from what I understood about Chidambaram Tillai Nataraja Murti is that the absence of the skull is essential, also from the point of doctrine. Although I cannot say I understand each and every aspect of that, but this Murti obviously has a skull. He wears a skull, and the datura flower, and the kudumi, and the crane feathers. So the crane feathers are specifically mentioned in Chidambaram and in the Mayamatam. That is a text on iconography.
So this is the datura flower, right? This is the datura flower.
That's the datura flower.
And this, and what is this?
Then that must be the kudumi.
Okay, all right. And here,
or maybe this is the kudumi, the datura flower, and this is the or other way around. You would have to look closer, I think.
And you see the hair, as Liesbeth mentioned, just falling just above the shoulder.
Falling down on the shoulders.
Relax, all down.
And then if you see it from the back, you can see the tresses, you can see them fall down his back. All, like a fan shaped.
And here
very different from the dynamic Nataraja, where the hair is all flying around his head.
And here we have the kinkini, and here we have the
kinkinis there.
Anklets.
The anklets.
The karal.
Anklets. Yeah, and the snake, of course.
And here we have the sash, or the tassel, which comes and attaches itself to the prabha. And there is also another tassel that comes out between the legs and attaches itself to the prabha.
Yeah.
So now, as we all know.
Yeah. Now the interesting part.
No, Appar and Sambandar lived in the 6th and 7th century, right? And they, in the course of their peregrinations, visited Tillai. Okay. Now, at Tillai, Appar sang 8 pathikams, right? While Sambandar sang 2 pathikams. These are the Tevaram hymns. So Appar sang 8 and Sambandar sang 2. So what was the form that Appar and Sambandar actually saw in Tillai?
Yeah.
Okay. So what
we have done
is we have gone through the Tevaram hymns and pieced together the form of Nataraja from the Tillai hymns alone. Okay. And that particular form that results from what is mentioned in the Tevaram has been sort of compared, or it's been examined from the standpoint of the Silpasastra and the Agama text. That is, what was the form that the Iruvar, let's call Appar and Sambandar Iruvar because the two of them, what did they see, and how does what they see compare against the Silpasastra and the Agama text? Also, how does what the Iruvar saw compare against the form that we just went through and described at Chidambaram? That is, how does it compare with the form today? Okay, so here is a sort of a list of attributes mentioned in the Tillai Tevaram, and I will just mention a few of them specifically. As Liesbeth mentioned, the tresses of hair are mentioned as having, are drooping or falling down. Okay, that's specifically mentioned in the Tevaram. Okay?
Very clear. Very clear.
The crescent moon is mentioned. The Datura flower is mentioned. No mention of the skull is made on the head, which means the skull on the head is absent. Okay. Specifically, the boar's tusk necklace on the neck is mentioned. The damaru or the udukai is mentioned. The flame is mentioned, dancing with the flame, and the snake is mentioned. All right. The hand posture, the hand poses are mentioned, and the garments made of tiger skin, elephant skin, etc. are mentioned. The tassels are not mentioned. Okay. The anklets on the feet are mentioned. Okay. The musicians on the pita are mentioned, and what is not mentioned is the apasmara or the muyulakan.
Yeah, that is interesting also.
The crane feather and the kudumi or the top knot that Liesbeth mentioned. These three are not mentioned. Now, so what I would say is I would like to just read out for you 2 or 3 lines which will sort of help us understand what Appar said. So excuse me if there will be many mistakes as I read. So let me read a line.
Well, I don't notice it, I don't know Tamil. That's why I think it's so fantastic. You throw yourself in this project.
So it says, Appar says, Tillayul Chidambalathu Nattam Aada Edutthitta Padam Andro. What he says is it not the foot that was lifted while dancing in the Chidambaram of Tillai? I mean, this is a very important phrase, okay? Because he talks about the leg being lifted. Okay?
Super clear. Super clear.
In continuation of that particular line, he says, Nammai Aatkondade, in a sense, that foot admitted us as his devotee. Okay, so this is a very important couplet. The other thing that I would like to read out is about the hand. Okay, and he says, Appar says, Kai nintra Adal Kandal Pinnai Kankondu Kanbadu Enne. In a sense, if one observes the position, imagine what he says, if one observes the position of the hand, what is left to see hereafter with the eyes? In the sense, what Liesbeth mentioned to the hand pointing towards the foot for the release. Okay? After that, there is nothing left to see.
After that, there's nothing important.
Appar says. Okay. Now we have been arguing. All of us have been arguing about the form, but I think for Appar and Sambandar, the form was quite well established. And then just another
and also the doctrine, Also the whole doctrine of release of Anandam.
Go ahead.
No, I mean the whole doctrine
the other thing that we just mentioned, it says here, Adi, Kajal, Arka, Nindru, Anal Yeri, Adumare. So he says, what it means is dancing with a blazing flame, that is the flame in the hand, causes the anklets on the feet to sound or to roar. So all these things that we have picked up are pretty much covered by Appar and Sambandar. Let's just move on. There are some aspects which were not mentioned, okay, and that is the Muyilakam has not been, Apasmara or Muyilakam has not been mentioned in Tillai. And if we research the Tevaram a bit, one notices that there is a historically very significant place, even from the times of the Sangam, called Talayalangaadu, where Shiva is said to have vanquished Muyilakkan and danced over him. Okay, and the name of the temple there is the Nartanapurishwara temple at Talayalangaadu. Okay, now Appar in other places, okay, especially at Kanjanu and Innambu, has mentioned the Muyilakkan in his hymns. And very interestingly, at Talayalangaadu, Appar mentions the Kokiraku. This is the Kokiraku or the Rohinia acuminata, which is the white orchid flower which graces the hair of the Nartanapurishwara or Nataraja. So these things were all quite well known around the 6th and 7th century. And this Talayalangaadu is very significant because it is specifically associated with the dance of Nataraja over Muyilakkan. Okay, and that is something that was well known during the time of the Tevaram hymners. All right. Now the final question is, what then would the form at Chidambaram have looked like? Okay, during the time of the Tevaram. Now on the right is a photograph of the Puram bronze.
Personally, I think it would have been exactly as it is today, but that's my personal. That's my personal insight in these things.
So here is the bronze.
I mean, you are more art historian than I am. So
no,
please.
No, but here is the form from the Madras Museum, the Puram bronze, which Liesbeth has photographed, and this was dated to about 650 CE, or the 7th century by Sharada Srinivasan using her mass ion spectroscopy. So you have an image, okay, of Nataraja dancing in Urdhvajanu, or we can call it maybe an extreme version of Bhujanga Lalita, where the leg is actually raised. The leg is actually raised, like what Appar says. Okay, and or else you have the Siyamangalam granite image, the Pallava, another Pallava image, like the Puram bronze, where the leg is actually, left and across in Bhujanga Trasita. So either one of these positions is definitely possible, but it is more likely to have been, Bhujanga Trasita, like the one at Siyamangalam, because the British Museum bronze, which Barrett emphasized so much, okay, has also been dated to 800 CE by Sharada Srinivasan using her experimental methods. And so you actually have, like Barrett actually prophesied, you actually have a complete image, okay? And of course, the word complete is a bit of a misnomer, but you have an image which very much resembles the hair being down, okay, the prabha around.
I think all the essential elements are simply there.
Right. So
in
all
the
the
time
essential,
Appar and
which is what we essentially have concluded, that most of the attributes of Nataraja mentioned in the Shilpa and Agama texts seem to have been observed by Appar and Sambandar in Tillai around the 6th and 7th century. Similarly,
for me it's crystal clear.
The form of Nataraja observed at present in Tillai is also very similar to what is mentioned by the Tevaram hymners in Tillai, very similar. The image is very similar. Now, as we said, the left leg would have been in Bhujanga Trasita, very likely in Bhujanga Trasita. The possibility is very high that it was in Bhujanga Trasita, not only because of the Siyamangalam image, but because at Vruddhachalam, Sambandar uses the term Puyanga Nadanam. Okay, when he describes the dance of Nataraja, he uses the word Puyanga Nadanam, which is essentially Bhujanga Nadanam, which is what is described in the Nataraja and in the Agama text. Okay, so it seems that the possibility of Bhujanga Trasita is quite strong because of the dating of the British Museum bronze by Sharda Srinivasan to 800 CE, and also because the hymns of Appar and Sambandar seem to suggest that we had quite a complete image in the 6th, 7th century until the image.
See, if the raised foot,
quite complete, had all that.
The raised foot is essential also in its position across the body, and the hand pointing at it, because if you have a hand across the body and point at something, you have to have the foot raised on the other side. I mean, that's the logic of the movement.
Right. So I would just close with saying that in the Brihadishwara temple, there is a mural of Nataraja dancing in Bhujanga Trasita, and this painting is a Tola painting, dated to the year, dated to about 10, so early 11th century, where Rajaraja is seen observing the dance of Nataraja in the Kanaka Sabha and Chit Sabha, and this is quite similar to the form that we see today, quite similar to the form that has been observed by Appar and Sambandar in the 7th century. But I think the most relevant painting is what Liesbeth has photographed in the Shivakami Amman shrine. This is very, very similar to what Appar and Sambandar described. You have the hair falling down, you have the prabha, okay, you have the hair which is essentially on the shoulders, okay, you have the hand in Dola Hasta, you have the snake, you have the tamaru, you have the flame. Very interestingly, you have a tassel or a sash that emerges from the hip, but remember, it is in the form of a snake, and that is essentially what Appar says. Snake which is wrapped around. The snake which is wrapped around the hip or the waist, and you see it is basically the form of a snake. And then they mentioned the garment of tiger skin, and you see here you have the tiger skin, another tassel that
another
is forming and moving over towards the prabha, and you have the Muilakan, and you have the two musicians that that Liesbeth mentioned. So essentially, and of course, I should not forget the anklets and the kinkini here. So even though this is a late painting from the Nayak period, which has been photographed by Liesbeth on the Shivakami Amman shrine, on the ceiling, this is very representative of what the Tevaram hymners would have described. That they saw.
It shows the continuity,
Very similar to the form that we see today. Yes, as you say, it's continuity. There seems to be quite a bit of continuity.
I think it's very important. It's very important because most Western scholars have ignored this. They do mention the Tevaram and they look at it, of course. But I mean, you make it so crystal clear now that there is no doubt that already at the time of the Tevaram, the tradition of the Anandatandava and Chidambaram was completely functioning and already, probably already ancient.
We will conclude by acknowledging the various people from whom we have gathered information. Dr. Shivaram Murthy, the Tevaram books by Gopal Iyer and Gross from the Institute of the French Institute in Pondicherry,
Yeah.
and the various other images, and of course Sharada Srinivasan's phenomenal work on the Pallava origins of the Nataraja bronze, and of course the British Museum picture which we have taken. So thank you very much, Liesbeth, and thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And thank everybody for the attention. And I hope there will be more research, more discussion, and more dancing.
All right. So let me now end this session. Thank you all.
Let's conclude this. Vanakkam.
Thank you.